The morning sun painted the ancient harbor in golden hues as three college friends stepped off the ferry, their backpacks heavy with expectations and cameras ready to capture every moment. Sarah, Marcus, and Elena had saved for months to visit this remote coastal village, drawn by online photos of its untouched beauty and whispered stories of traditions that had survived centuries of change. The cobblestone streets seemed to whisper secrets as they made their way toward the harbor master's office, where they hoped to arrange a boat tour of the legendary sea caves. Local fishermen mended their nets with practiced hands, their weathered faces telling stories of countless storms weathered and fortunes found in the depths of the azure waters. As they approached the harbor office, a commotion near the docks caught their attention. A crowd had gathered around a magnificent sailing vessel, its white sails gleaming in the morning light. The boat was unlike anything they had seen before, a perfect blend of traditional craftsmanship and modern elegance, with intricate carvings along its hull that seemed to dance in the shifting shadows. Standing at the vessel's helm was a woman who commanded immediate attention. Captain Isabella Moreau possessed a presence that seemed to bridge centuries. Her silver hair was braided with small shells and sea glass, and her deep blue uniform bore symbols that spoke of maritime authority, earned through years of dedication. Her eyes, the color of storm clouds, surveyed the gathered crowd with a mixture of warmth and quiet authority. The three friends exchanged glances, immediately intrigued. They had expected to find typical tourist boats with plastic seats and loud engines, but this vessel looked like something from a maritime museum, yet clearly still in active service. The captain's confident stance and the respectful way the local fishermen regarded her suggested she was no ordinary tour guide. Marcus, always the bold one among them, approached a local vendor selling fresh fish. The elderly man's eyes lit up when Marcus pointed toward the magnificent vessel and asked about the captain. In broken English mixed with passionate gestures, the vendor explained that Captain Moreau was the last of her kind, a woman who had inherited not just a boat, but an entire tradition of seamanship that her family had preserved for 8 generations. Elena, fascinated by cultural anthropology, immediately understood the significance. This wasn't just about a boat tour. They had stumbled upon something extraordinary. Sarah, practical as always, wondered if they could actually book passage with such an obviously special captain, or if she only served local dignitaries and wealthy collectors of unique experiences. The captain seemed to sense their curiosity from across the dock. She raised her hand in a subtle gesture and the crowd began to disperse, but not before each person approached her with obvious respect, some touching their foreheads in a traditional greeting, others simply nodding with deep reverence. As the dock cleared, Captain Moreau began inspecting her vessel with methodical precision, checking rigging, testing knots, and examining every detail with the care of someone whose life depended on perfection. Her movements were fluid and confident, each action purposeful and rooted in knowledge passed down through generations. The three friends found themselves mesmerized by this display of maritime expertise. They watched as she consulted an ancient-looking compass, its brass surface worn smooth by countless hands, and studied charts that appeared to be hand-drawn rather than mass-produced. Everything about her preparation spoke of traditions that had been refined over centuries, yet remained vibrantly alive in her capable hands. A gentle breeze carried the scent of salt and adventure across the harbor, and with it came the captain's voice, rich and melodious, calling out instructions in the local dialect to her small crew. 2 young men, clearly locals who had grown up around these boats, responded with the synchronized precision of a well-rehearsed dance. The friends realized they were witnessing something rare and precious, a living connection to maritime history that most of the world had forgotten. Modern technology had replaced the skills they were observing, but here in this timeless village, the old ways still flourished under the guidance of someone who understood their true value. As Captain Moreau completed her inspection, she finally looked directly at the 3 visitors. Her gaze was neither welcoming nor dismissive, but rather evaluative, as if she was assessing their readiness for something they couldn't yet understand. In that moment, the friends knew their adventure was about to begin in a way they had never imagined possible. Captain Moreau approached them with measured steps, her boots clicking softly against the weathered dock planks. Up close, the 3 friends could see the intricate details of her uniform: hand-stitched anchors, compass roses embroidered in silver thread, and brass buttons that had been polished to mirror brightness. Her presence was both intimidating and oddly comforting, like meeting a character from a beloved adventure novel who had somehow stepped into reality. Her first words surprised them. Speaking in accented but perfect English, she asked not about their destination or budget, but whether they understood the difference between seeing the ocean and truly knowing it. Sarah, Marcus, and Elena exchanged puzzled glances, unsure how to respond to such an unusual question from someone they hoped would be their tour guide. Elena, drawing on her anthropology background, ventured that knowing the ocean probably meant understanding its moods, its dangers, and its gifts. The captain's weathered face broke into the first smile they had seen, transforming her stern features into something warm and inviting. She nodded approvingly and explained that most visitors wanted to photograph the sea caves and collect shells, but few were interested in learning why the ocean had shaped their community for 8 centuries. Marcus, always practical, asked about prices and schedules. Captain Moreau laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, and explained that her family's tradition didn't operate on typical tourist schedules. Instead, they sailed when the conditions were right, when the tides aligned with ancient patterns her grandmother had taught her to read in the movement of clouds and the behavior of seabirds. She gestured toward her vessel, introducing it as the Esperanza del Mar, Hope of the Sea. The boat had been built by her great-grandfather's hands using techniques that predated modern shipbuilding, yet it had been continuously updated with safety equipment and navigation tools that honored both tradition and responsibility. Every plank, every rope, every sail had a story, and she was the keeper of those stories. The captain invited them aboard, but not as passive passengers. She explained that anyone who sailed with her became part of the crew, learning the basics of seamanship while discovering the coastal waters that had supported her family for generations. This wasn't a casual sightseeing tour, but an immersion into a way of life that connected people to the sea in ways that modern society had largely forgotten. As they climbed aboard, the captain introduced them to her crew. Diego, barely 18 but already an expert sailor, had grown up helping his father maintain the village's traditional boats. Carmen, slightly older and fiercely focused, was learning the traditional navigation methods that didn't rely on GPS or electronic instruments. Both young people showed obvious respect for their captain, but also the comfortable familiarity of chosen family. The captain began their education immediately, showing them how to read the wind by watching the water's surface, how to predict weather changes by observing cloud formations, and how to understand their position by recognizing coastal landmarks that had guided sailors for centuries. Her teaching method was hands-on, encouraging them to feel the boat's movement, to listen to the sounds of rigging and waves, to become physically connected to the sailing experience. Sarah found herself assigned to help with the sail preparations, learning knots that had specific names and purposes dating back hundreds of years. Marcus discovered that navigating by traditional methods required a different kind of attention than following GPS directions. It demanded constant awareness of multiple environmental factors simultaneously. Elena was fascinated by the cultural significance of everything they were learning, taking mental notes about how ancient knowledge was being preserved and passed on. The captain noticed their genuine interest and began sharing more personal stories. She spoke of her grandmother, who had been one of the first women allowed to captain vessels in their region, breaking barriers while maintaining absolute respect for maritime traditions. She described her father, who had modernized their family's approach to sailing while never compromising the core values that made their tradition special. As they prepared to leave the harbor, Captain Moreau explained that they would spend the next several hours learning not just to sail, but to understand why sailing in the traditional way created a different relationship with the ocean. Modern boats could cross the same waters faster and with less physical effort, but they couldn't provide the deep connection that came from working in harmony with natural forces rather than simply overpowering them. The 3 friends realized they had stumbled into something far more valuable than a typical tourist experience. They were about to receive an education in a way of life that honored both human skill and natural wisdom, guided by someone who embodied the very best of both traditional knowledge and contemporary responsibility. The moment the Esperanza del Mar cleared the harbor's protective walls, everything changed. The gentle rocking motion they had felt at the dock transformed into something alive and dynamic, as if the vessel had awakened to its true purpose. Captain Moreau's entire demeanor shifted as well, becoming more focused and alert, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon and checking the instruments that blended traditional tools with modern safety equipment. She called out instructions in a voice that carried clearly over the wind, teaching the three friends their first practical lesson in maritime communication. Every command had a specific purpose, and she expected immediate responses, not because she was harsh, but because the ocean demanded precision and teamwork. Sarah discovered that handling the rigging required both strength and technique, while Marcus learned that steering by traditional methods meant feeling the boat's response through his entire body. Elena found herself stationed near the captain, observing how she read the constantly changing conditions around them. Captain Moreau pointed out subtle signs that revealed the ocean's mood, the way waves reflected sunlight differently in deeper waters, how certain bird behaviors indicated fish movements below, and how cloud formations miles away would affect their sailing conditions within hours. As they sailed toward the legendary sea caves, the captain began sharing stories that brought the landscape to life. She spoke of merchant vessels that had sought shelter in these same waters during storms that lasted for days, of fishing families who had developed their own methods for reading underwater currents that determined where the best catches could be found. Each rocky outcropping and hidden cove had names and histories that connected the present moment to centuries of maritime heritage. The first sea cave they approached seemed like a cathedral carved from living stone, its entrance wide enough for their vessel, but requiring careful navigation to avoid underwater obstacles. Captain Moreau explained that her family had been exploring these caves for generations, learning their secrets through careful observation and patient exploration, rather than relying on sonar or electronic charts. Inside the cave, the water glowed with an ethereal blue-green light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The captain guided them deeper into the chamber, her voice echoing off the walls as she explained the geological processes that had created this underwater wonderland. But more importantly, she shared the cultural significance of these spaces, how they had served as emergency shelters, how they had inspired local artists and storytellers, how they remained sacred to the fishing families who considered them part of their spiritual heritage. Marcus was amazed by how the captain navigated the narrow passages without any apparent reference to instruments, relying instead on her knowledge of water depth, current patterns, and the way sound echoed differently in various parts of the cave system. She taught them to listen to these acoustic cues, showing them how experienced sailors could navigate even in complete darkness by understanding how the boat's movement created different sounds against cave walls. Sarah found herself captivated by the captain's stories of previous visitors who had experienced profound personal transformations during their time in these caves. The captain spoke of stressed executives who had discovered inner peace, of young people uncertain about their futures who had found direction, of families who had reconnected with each other away from the distractions of modern life. As they emerged from the caves into brilliant sunlight, Elena realized that this experience was changing her understanding of what preservation really meant. It wasn't just about protecting old buildings or artifacts in museums, but about keeping alive the human connections and practical knowledge that gave cultural traditions their real meaning. Captain Moreau wasn't just maintaining old techniques. She was demonstrating their continued relevance and value. The captain then surprised them by cutting the engine entirely and teaching them to sail using only wind power. This was where her expertise truly shone, as she guided them through the complex process of reading wind patterns, adjusting sail positions, and working with natural forces rather than against them. The silence was profound once they adapted to moving without mechanical noise, allowing them to hear the subtle sounds of water against the hull, wind in the rigging, and the calls of seabirds overhead. During this peaceful sailing, Captain Moreau shared more personal reflections about her role as the keeper of her family's traditions. She spoke of the responsibility she felt to pass on knowledge that had taken generations to accumulate, and of her hopes that young people like Diego and Carmen would continue these traditions, while adapting them for future challenges like climate change and economic pressures on traditional fishing communities. The three friends began to understand that they weren't just tourists anymore, but witnesses to something precious and increasingly rare in the modern world, a living connection between human skill, natural wisdom, and cultural continuity that had survived because people like Captain Moreau had dedicated their lives to preserving and sharing it. The afternoon brought unexpected challenges that transformed their educational journey into a real test of the skills they had been learning. Dark clouds appeared on the horizon faster than anyone had predicted, and Captain Moreau's expression became serious as she watched the changing weather patterns. She explained that this was exactly the kind of situation where traditional knowledge became invaluable, as electronic weather forecasts couldn't capture the local micro-conditions that experienced sailors learned to read through years of observation. Without any sense of panic, but with obvious urgency, the captain began preparing the vessel for rougher conditions. She assigned each of the three friends specific responsibilities, treating them not as passengers who needed protection, but as crew members whose contribution was essential for everyone's safety. Sarah found herself learning to secure equipment that could become dangerous projectiles in heavy seas, while Marcus discovered the importance of double-checking every knot and connection under the captain's watchful supervision. Elena was stationed with Captain Moreau at the navigation station, where she learned how experienced sailors made critical decisions during changing conditions. The captain explained her thought process aloud, weighing factors like wind direction, wave height, distance to various safe harbors, and the capabilities of her vessel and crew. It was like watching a master chess player consider multiple moves ahead, except the stakes were real and immediate. As the first serious waves began rocking the Esperanza del Mar, the captain demonstrated why her family's traditional approach to seamanship had survived for so many generations. Every aspect of the boat's design and every technique they used had been tested by centuries of sailors facing similar challenges. The vessel's deep keel and flexible rigging allowed it to move with the waves rather than fighting against them, while the crew's coordinated responses reflected knowledge passed down through countless storms. The captain's leadership during this tense period revealed another dimension of her character. She remained calm and decisive, but also encouraging and patient with her inexperienced crew. She understood that fear was natural, but she also knew that confidence came from competence. So she continued teaching even as they battled increasingly difficult conditions. Her voice remained steady as she called out instructions, and her obvious mastery of the situation helped the three friends discover reserves of courage they hadn't known they possessed. Diego and Carmen showed their true value during this challenging period, responding to the captain's commands with the kind of automatic precision that comes from extensive training and complete trust in their leader. The three tourists began to understand that what they were witnessing wasn't just traditional sailing techniques, but a complete system of human cooperation that had been refined over generations to handle exactly these kinds of emergencies. As they worked together to navigate through the storm, Captain Moreau shared stories of previous challenges her family had faced on these same waters. She spoke of her grandfather's legendary rescue of a foundering fishing vessel during a hurricane, of her grandmother's solo voyage to summon help for a village cut off by winter storms, of her own experiences learning to remain calm and focused when lives depended on her decisions. The storm tested not just their sailing skills, but their ability to work as a team under pressure. Marcus discovered that his competitive nature from college sports translated well to the intense focus required for sailing, while Sarah found that her analytical mind helped her anticipate problems before they became critical. Elena realized that her interest in cultural preservation had deeper meaning when she was actually participating in the traditions she had previously only studied academically. When they finally reached the protected waters of a small cove that Captain Moreau had selected as their safe haven, the sense of accomplishment was overwhelming. They had successfully navigated a real storm using traditional sailing techniques, guided by someone who embodied generations of maritime wisdom. The experience had transformed them from tourists observing a quaint local custom into participants in a living tradition that had proven its worth under actual challenging conditions. As they dropped anchor in the calm waters, the captain took a moment to acknowledge their performance. She praised their willingness to learn, their cooperation under pressure, and their growing understanding of what it meant to work in harmony with natural forces rather than simply trying to dominate them. Her approval meant more than any tourist souvenir could have, because it represented recognition from someone whose standards were based on real expertise and genuine care for their safety and education. The storm had given them something no planned tourist activity could provide: a shared experience of challenge overcome through knowledge, skill, and teamwork. They had discovered that traditional ways of doing things weren't just nostalgic alternatives to modern methods, but time-tested solutions that still worked when conditions demanded the very best from both technology and human capability. In the sheltered cove where they had found refuge from the storm, Captain Moreau revealed another layer of her family's maritime tradition. As the evening sun painted the water in shades of gold and crimson, she began preparing a meal using ingredients and methods that had sustained sailors for generations. From the boat's carefully organized storage areas, she produced preserved fish, sea vegetables, and grains that could withstand long voyages while providing essential nutrition. The three friends watched in fascination as she demonstrated cooking techniques designed specifically for life aboard sailing vessels. Every utensil had multiple purposes. Every ingredient was chosen for both nutritional value and storage durability. She explained that her great-grandmother had developed many of these recipes during the harsh years when fishing families depended entirely on what the sea could provide and what they could preserve for lean seasons. As they shared this simple but delicious meal, Captain Moreau opened up about the personal challenges of maintaining traditional ways of life in a rapidly changing world. She spoke of family members who had chosen different paths, pursuing careers in cities where their maritime skills seemed irrelevant. She described the economic pressures that made it difficult for young people like Diego and Carmen to commit to learning traditional trades that didn't offer the financial security of modern jobs. Elena found herself deeply moved by the captain's reflections on cultural preservation. Here was someone who had dedicated her life to keeping alive knowledge that could easily be lost within a single generation if no one cared enough to learn and practice it. The captain explained that every time someone chose convenience over connection, a little more traditional wisdom disappeared from the world. Sarah, always practical, asked about the future of traditions like the captain's family sailing methods. Captain Moreau's answer surprised them with its optimism. She explained that climate change and environmental concerns were actually making traditional approaches more relevant than ever. Modern industrial fishing was damaging ocean ecosystems, while traditional methods worked in harmony with natural cycles and maintained the health of marine environments. Marcus was intrigued by the captain's business model, which seemed to defy conventional tourism economics. Instead of maximizing the number of customers, she focused on providing meaningful experiences that created lasting connections to maritime culture. Her visitors often returned year after year, bringing friends and family members who wanted to experience the same deep connection to traditional seamanship. As darkness fell over their protected anchorage, Captain Moreau introduced them to celestial navigation, showing them how sailors had found their way across vast oceans long before satellites and electronic instruments. Using star charts that had been hand-copied and passed down through her family, she taught them to identify key constellations and understand their movement across the night sky. The experience of learning navigation by starlight was almost mystical. Away from city lights, the night sky revealed layers of stars they had never noticed, and the captain's knowledge transformed these distant lights into practical tools for finding direction and determining their position on the Earth's surface. She shared stories of her ancestors who had made journeys guided only by stars, wind patterns, and their accumulated knowledge of ocean currents. Diego and Carmen contributed their own perspectives to the evening's discussion, representing the challenges and opportunities facing young people who were choosing to learn traditional skills in a modern world. They spoke passionately about their desire to preserve their cultural heritage while also adapting it to address contemporary environmental and social challenges. The captain revealed that she was working with marine biologists and environmental organizations to document how traditional fishing practices could contribute to ocean conservation efforts. Her family's knowledge of fish migration patterns, seasonal changes in marine ecosystems, and sustainable harvesting techniques was proving valuable to scientists studying the impact of climate change on coastal environments. As they prepared to sleep aboard the gently rocking vessel, the three friends realized that their understanding of tradition had been completely transformed. They had begun their journey thinking of traditional practices as interesting historical curiosities, but they were ending it with a deep appreciation for the wisdom and relevance of knowledge systems that had been refined over centuries of practical experience. The captain's final lesson of the day was about the importance of silence and reflection in understanding one's relationship with the natural world. In the peaceful darkness of their sheltered cove, with only the gentle sounds of water lapping against the hull and the distant calls of night seabirds, they began to understand what she meant about the difference between seeing the ocean and truly knowing it. The storm they had weathered together had created a bond between them that went beyond the typical relationship between service provider and customer. They had become part of the captain's extended maritime family, carrying with them not just memories of an unusual vacation, but a deeper understanding of what it meant to live in harmony with forces larger than themselves. Dawn broke over their sheltered anchorage with a clarity that seemed to match the transformation the three friends had undergone during their time with Captain Moreau. The storm had passed, leaving behind air so clean and bright that every detail of the coastline stood out with extraordinary definition. As they prepared for their return journey to the main harbor, the captain announced that their final lesson would be the most important one: learning to carry the essence of traditional wisdom into their modern lives. The return voyage became a practical examination of everything they had learned. Captain Moreau assigned each of them leadership responsibilities for different aspects of the journey, while she observed and provided guidance only when necessary. Sarah found herself in charge of navigation, using both traditional methods and modern instruments to plot their course. Marcus took responsibility for sail management, reading wind conditions and making adjustments that kept them moving efficiently toward their destination. Elena was given the most challenging assignment. She became the crew coordinator, responsible for communicating between different team members and ensuring that everyone understood their roles in the various maneuvers required for safe sailing. This role helped her understand how traditional knowledge systems depended on clear communication and mutual trust between people with different levels of expertise. As they sailed through waters that now felt familiar rather than foreign, Captain Moreau shared her philosophy about the relationship between tradition and progress. She explained that the most successful traditional practices were those that had always been willing to incorporate useful innovations while maintaining their core principles. Her family's sailing methods had evolved continuously over 8 generations, adopting new safety equipment and navigation tools while preserving the fundamental understanding of how to work in harmony with ocean conditions. The captain revealed that many of her most devoted students were professionals from high-tech industries who had discovered that traditional approaches to problem-solving offered valuable perspectives that couldn't be found in modern business schools or technical training programs. The patience, attention to detail, and systems thinking required for traditional seamanship translated well to many contemporary challenges. Diego and Carmen added their own insights about how they planned to use their traditional maritime education in careers that bridged old and new approaches to ocean-related work. Diego was studying marine biology and hoped to combine traditional ecological knowledge with modern scientific methods to develop better conservation strategies. Carmen was interested in sustainable tourism that could provide economic opportunities for coastal communities while preserving their cultural heritage. As they approached the familiar harbor where their journey had begun, the three friends realized that leaving would be more difficult than they had expected. They had formed genuine friendships with the captain and her crew, and they had discovered interests and capabilities they hadn't known they possessed. The experience had changed their understanding not just of maritime traditions, but of what it meant to live with purpose and connection to something larger than immediate personal goals. Captain Moreau seemed to understand their mixed emotions about departure. She explained that the most important aspect of traditional education was learning to carry lessons forward into new situations and different environments. The specific skills they had learned, knot tying, sail handling, celestial navigation, were less important than the underlying principles of careful observation, patient learning, and respectful cooperation with natural forces. She presented each of them with a small gift that embodied these principles. Sarah received a traditional compass that had belonged to the captain's grandmother, along with instructions for using it not just for navigation, but as a reminder to always maintain a sense of direction in life. Marcus was given a piece of rope with several specialized knots, representing the importance of strong connections and reliable techniques for solving practical problems. Elena's gift was the most personal, a journal that had been used by several generations of the captain's family to record observations about weather patterns, ocean conditions, and the behavior of marine life. The captain explained that this represented the importance of continuous learning and the responsibility to document knowledge for future generations. As they prepared to disembark at the main harbor, Captain Moreau made them an offer that surprised and delighted them. She invited them to return the following year as assistant instructors, helping her teach other visitors while continuing to develop their own maritime skills. The opportunity to become part of her extended tradition, rather than simply observing it from the outside, felt like the perfect continuation of their transformative experience. The three friends accepted without hesitation, understanding that they had found something rare and precious, a way of connecting with the natural world that provided both practical skills and spiritual satisfaction. Their tourist adventure had become the beginning of a lifelong relationship with traditional knowledge and the remarkable woman who had dedicated her life to preserving and sharing. As they walked away from the harbor, their backpacks now supplemented with gifts and memories that couldn't be captured in photographs. They were already planning their return. They had discovered that the most valuable souvenirs weren't things that could be purchased, but experiences that changed how they understood their place in the world and their responsibility to preserve wisdom that connected past, present, and future in an unbroken chain of human learning and growth.